nothing better than watching you smile. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Ain't nothing better than watching you laugh out loud, my baby. Ain't nothing better than watching you.
Greetings. This video is intended to provide an overview of the work being conducted at the Delta Research Center. With over 500 chemical processes in the mitochondria, we've always been intrigued with the vast possibilities. There are many ways to skin the cat, in a manner of speaking. And over the past several years, myself, together with my physicist and 2 engineers, we've developed several technologies that demonstrate effectiveness in correcting mitochondrial dysfunction, in addition to the use of the BX. The Research Center is the pilot operation. It's the prototype for the larger health restoration resort. Incorporates obviously several of the technologies. Currently we have a resort in China, for example. It's being converted into a health restoration resort. We also are in the process of establishing similar resorts in Cancun and Dubai. But the Cancun Delta Research Center represents a developmental stepping stone to the larger resort model. It's an interim model, and the U.S. interim model, which we're currently phasing out, does utilize the technologies, but the intended use is centered on general toxicity, general health, issues of bioelectric depletion, and so forth. So I'm going to provide a basic overview of the other technologies that have reached completion that we're using at the center, which, by the way, is not suited for large capacity. We can handle about 30 people or so a month in our 30-day outpatient program. Members should expect to be at the center about 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. Food is provided during the day with fresh organic soups, a variety of fruits, vegetables, grains, nuts, juicing, smoothies, etc. And members have access to the kitchen, so they can eat as much as they want, as much as they desire, as a general rule. So let's discuss the primary modalities, how they optimize the BX and accelerate the intended outcomes. The BX energy catalyst is used at the research center, but the primary difference in the effectiveness relates to the enhanced effect of the BX in response to the other modalities, the technologies, or simply just the standalone effectiveness of the technologies themselves. So let's start with the radio oscillator. The intended effect consists of modifying filterable forms of bacteria that are often at the root of mitochondrial dysfunction, or modifying the chemical agents that may not be associated with the organism, that just may be a true chemical carcinogen that's blocking complex 1. These structures that are targeted structures in the complex 1 protein demonstrate certain electrical characteristics. And the radio oscillator is designed to affect the electrical polarities. It's just separating the electrical charge in a manner that breaks up the bonds that are locking up these transport intermediates that are in turn locking up normal metabolism, thereby forcing fermentation. But what Rife and Kendall really were dealing with, and which has never really been understood until now, is unsaturated proteins, generally associated with filterable forms of bacteria, that condense and bind up NADH. And if you're wondering what NADH is, it's a molecule that resides in a cell's mitochondria, mostly, and helps produce ATP for the cells. The bacterial proteins that we're talking about, these unsaturated proteins, are locking up the action of NADH. That's why cancer cells have twice as much NADH. The cells are trying to compensate for this dysfunction. The radio oscillator breaks these bacterial bonds in a manner that restores the action of NADH. We're talking about, obviously, about energy production here. And NADH is a donor that transfers electrons through the membrane to eventually produce energy for the cell. So the primary mechanism of action of the radio oscillator is to dismantle the proteins of the organism, or in some cases to dismantle chemical carcinogens that behave in a similar manner with respect to binding NADH. And yes, there's no hiding the fact that we're attempting to replicate Rife-like results as they pertain to the original Rife machine. We've been building these things for years, and I'll be the first to admit that none of them have ever worked until now. You take a look at Rife's original work, and you find no mention of audio frequencies. No mention. And every machine out there is modulating with acoustical energy, including the ones that we previously built. But people continue to build them, mostly out of fear of spraying RF into the atmosphere. I don't know, and getting triangulated by the FTC. But there's no doubt that when you're using pure RF-like units, like the units that we're currently using at the research center, you need to operate in a Faraday cage to shield the energy. All of our units have been tested and are operated within the research center in a Faraday environment. The other aspect of this is I've never been able to actually get results with the solid state equivalent of the original work. So we completely scrapped the whole solid state format long ago and actually went back to the original work and constructed fully analog units which produce a completely different waveform altogether than the modern day digital conversion that we see in the solid state equipment. You have several stages of amplification with the old vacuum tubes, some of which you have to get from Russia because you can no longer get them in the United States or in Europe. They're just not available. Some of the parts we had to actually make from scratch. The machines have to be manually tuned using a frequency analyzer, which we have to modify to use because the high frequency meters, they're just not designed for long wave frequency applications. So when you're returning to the original analog format, there are several significant challenges that had to be addressed. But as far as I can determine, we're the first to build a true replica of the original model because the patents certainly do not reveal the important details. The crystal oscillator stage is never mentioned in the original patent. The fact that Rife was using a combined frequency of fixed plus a variable frequency to achieve stability, that was never mentioned. The fact that no audio is imposed on the frequency. You look at the original patent and it's riddled with errors, yes, but I think it would be more accurate to conclude that they're just simple omissions, intentional omissions that are disguised as errors. So a number of things have been altered, and it just took a long time to work through the various discrepancies, but my engineers kept at it, and we now have what we believe is a device that is nearest to Rife's work than any other unit made since that time. We're seeing similar results in tumors conditions, and having a collection of Rife instruments that could literally fill a room, I'll tell you that the breakthrough in the technology is absolutely astonishing. We also utilize what we call magnetic oscillation at the research center. This device produces an ultra-short magnetic pulse that directly affects the permeability of the mitochondrial membrane. It's a very specific mechanism, and the way that it works is simply by increasing the permeability of the membrane. And by doing that, we accelerate the release of cytochrome C, which is a small protein that's found in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. Well, cytochrome C just happens to initiate cell death, to initiate apoptosis between complex 3 and 4 by enhancing peroxide formation. So the same type of effect, at least from the peroxide formation point of view, that we're getting in complex 1 is the same type of effect that we're getting between complex 3 and 4 just by promoting membrane permeability. The other thing that it does is kind of a secondary effect, is it potentiates and amplifies the peroxide signaling as a wave. So basic summary, promote membrane linkage of cytochrome C that triggers peroxide formation in the mitochondria, which pumps out signals that initiate cell death. Now, an interesting point on this device, we have had complete remedial effect, remediation of several conditions, including tumors conditions, with this device alone, without the BX, just as an isolated therapy. So it represents a very effective weaponry in the overall arsenal of the research center. Then we have the biophoton generators. These are photon systems best understood from a quantum mechanics perspective, which is yet another way of saying that we're not sure where the action is occurring, but we postulate, as have others, that the electron transport chain may in fact be a photon-mediated pathway, and that the transport intermediates involved in transferring electrons within the inner membrane may in fact be in some way dependent upon photon absorption. Certainly not clear whether ATP is energy derived, actually derived from chemical reactions themselves, or if there is some type of underlying quantum medium that actually drives energy production like photons. We've been talking about chemical and electrical mediated signaling in mitochondrial function for quite some time, but photon-based signal propagation is something that we're just barely starting to explore. And there's an interesting study recently conducted by a group of scientists from Iran, Canada, Czech Republic, a few other countries, that collaborated on a study that demonstrated scientifically that the intensity of biophoton emissions from cellular structures has a direct correlation with energy metabolism. They've effectively identified the emergence of biophotons as being directly related to what they called the bioluminescent radical of reactive oxygen species. And again, the work being conducted at the research center obviously is centered in oxygen-mediated reactions, so this possibility of enhancing biophoton emissions from living tissues is absolutely incredible, particularly when we can actually measure the effect on increased cellular metabolism. The whole idea of measuring cellular efficiency by accelerating the intensity of what we could term as an individual's light field may sound like something out of Star Trek or some futuristic movie, but the fact that light in the form of biophotons is important to cellular function is a theoretical possibility that at the very least can't be underestimated or shouldn't be underestimated. And we're definitely seeing that type of effect with the biophoton generators that we're using at the research center, particularly when we combine them with the magnetic and radio oscillators. There's kind of a symbiotic interaction. For example, with the magnetic oscillator, we can actually depolarize the mitochondrial membrane, which directly affects biophoton emission from living tissue, which again has this fascinating correlation with energy metabolism in general. So the possibilities here are just enormous. Because keep in mind, with every technology that we've developed at the research center, we're talking about exploiting the signaling pathways of reactive oxygen species, particularly peroxides. With the biophoton generators at the research center, we're most likely looking at yet another means of initiating signal propagation. I suspect that when all is said and done, that the scientific community will be forced to start paying serious attention to the role of biophotons in cellular metabolism. So we have the radio oscillator, the magnetic oscillator, the photon technology at the research center, but we also have the BX, which when used in conjunction with the other modalities optimizes and accelerates the effect of the BX. So if we're looking at the BX could be viewed as a redox signaling agent that modifies cellular function by simply initiating peroxide formation selectively in impaired cells, which then propagate intracellular signaling. That in the case of a cancer cell leads to cell death, or in the case of a cell that has impaired mitochondrial function in general, which could include many of the autoimmune type disorders, leads to a correction of the cell's oxidative processes. As evidenced at the research center by a normalization of reactive oxygen metabolites that we're actually testing through spectrophotometry. I'm going to get into that a little later in another video, but the basic result is the total resolution of oxidative stress in general. The mechanism of action of the various technologies combined as used at the research center is aimed at correcting and optimizing cellular metabolism. Supportive modalities at the research center or the forthcoming health restoration resort model include the various biooxidative therapies like hyperbarics or long chain oxide therapy, far, near, and mid infrared type therapies to enhance oxygen diffusion. We're not using them as a hyperthermia, but to enhance oxygen diffusion. Nutritional therapies, immune support type therapies, and the like. Okay, on the hybrid diagnostic model that we utilize at the Research Center, which includes a combination of traditional diagnostics in tandem with the other measurables that we use at the Research Center, like respirometry, measurement of oxidative stress, live blood analysis, etc. I think that the information there is so substantial that it really deserves special attention. So I'll do another video called BX Diagnostics, so we can really explore that in an isolated format. And that video will cover the use of spectrophotometry to measure hydroperoxides and plasma antioxidant values, and the significance between the relative differential, okay, the relationship between hydroperoxides and antioxidant values. What we've discovered here should lead to a radically different view of antioxidants in general, particularly in relationship to the efficiency of reactive oxygen species. Next, we'll discuss in that video utilizing open respirometry, which we do at the Research Center to measure VO2, VCO2 exchange ratios in addition to caloric burn. The results from these studies are really a confirmation of Warburg's basic theory that cancer is the result, and many other diseases now we're finding are the result of impaired respiration at the cellular level. And by measuring the baseline impairments and the outcomes while someone's at the Research Center using open respirometry, we can measure the relationship between the biooxidative inefficiency as a baseline and the condition in general and the subsequent improvements. Also, we use live blood analysis at the center to study the effect of the BX protocol on the hypertonicity of impaired cells, necrosis factors, hypoxia, among other things, and we'll probably explore that further and in more detail in the BX Diagnostics video that will follow in the near future. I like to think of the Delta Restoration Resort model as the hospital of the future for chronic degenerative conditions. A model that incorporates all of the Delta Research Center technologies, which collectively are intended to resolve the major deficiencies that prevail in the modern day healthcare establishment. I spoke to a doctor recently, and she said that she thought that the model represented a paradigm shift, where we're moving from this effort to address or to ineffectively mask symptomology to actually addressing causation. And the Delta Restoration Resort model is, I like to look at it as a system that brings all of the possibilities to bear on the condition with emphasis on energy-based technologies and small molecular weight compounds. I like to think of the fact that the future is small molecular weight compounds. We're in the era of small molecular weight compounds. Some of these macrobiological compounds are pushing molecular weights of 3,000, 4,000. It's never going to affect a 40 nanometer bacterium or unsaturated proteins at the very smallest level. It's like the mouse, as I've said before, it's like the mouse trying to swallow the elephant, and it's just not going to happen. The Restoration Resort model is founded by medical pioneers, or better yet, medical or scientific innovators, if you will, most of whom are not associated with the mainstream medical establishment, mostly privately funded pragmatic researchers who embrace the theory that mitochondrial dysfunction is at the root of the vast majority of chronic pathologies. It's the future of medicine. It's the medicine of the future. And the future is upon us, my friends. Thank you for your support.